Father Victor, can you tell us about this icon, about the icon of founder of our parish?
Well, of course, since he is the founder of our parish, he founded it in September 1949, when he came to Washington to plead before Congress and the American administration on behalf of his flock, which was living a miserable life in the Filipino island of Tubabao. He came to Washington, gathered a group of dedicated faithful who were dedicated to the Russian Orthodox Church outside of Russia. And he founded our parish, and the first liturgy he served was on the feast of the beheading of St. John the Baptist, which is celebrated on September 11th, which of course in American history is a day of sorrow when the terrorists attacked in 2001. But so we have special regard and love for St. John of Shanghai, and we consider him to our second patron saint. He was canonized in 1994 in San Francisco, and we commissioned this icon before his canonization at the end of 1993. But we all knew that the canonization was happening, and I wanted very much to take this icon with me to San Francisco for the canonization, to have it blessed on his relics, and also to carry it in procession around the cathedral of the Joy of All Who Sorrow, where Vladika's relics are kept. The icon was painted by a very talented Russian iconographer from Moscow, Viktor Kazanin, who has done actually a lot of work in our church. He painted the altar walls, he painted the balcony of the choir loft, and he painted many other separate icons in the church. But this icon was, I think, a stroke of genius. It was really a work inspired by God. Vladika is dressed in a white garb. He's holding a model of our church in his hand, which indicates that he is the founder of our community. And then you see the icon of the Kursk Mother of God just above him. That's important because Vladika had a great veneration for the Kursk Mother of God. And as a matter of fact, on July 2nd, 1966, he passed away in Seattle in the presence of the Kursk Mother of God. And then, of course, around the central part of the icon are different scenes from his life, beginning with his birth in Ukraine, and then on the right-hand side, his tonsure as a monk, and then his consecration as a bishop. And then on the other side here is the building of the cathedral in Shanghai, which he oversaw. And here on this side, on the left side, is Vladika John visiting the countless sick people in China. And here on the other side is Vladika gathering orphans together and taking care of them. And of course this one, which is very unusual for a Russian Orthodox icon, because it depicts the US Capitol. And of course that reminds us of how Vladika for months lobbied, I always say lobbied Congress. He came to Washington and met with officials to change the immigration laws, to get his thousands of stranded Russian refugees on the island of Tubabao. And he was successful, and the immigration law was amended, which allowed all of the Russians to come to the United States, some went to South America, others went to Australia. But the main thing is he was successful in getting them out of those miserable conditions in the jungles of Tubabao. And then here we have some more scenes. Here's the scene of Vladika Jan completing the building of the Cathedral of the Joy of All Whose Sorrow in San Francisco. And there was one space left, and the iconographer, Victor Kazanin, said, "What should I depict?" I said, "Why don't you depict the scene where Vladika Jan served a memorial service for the Serbian King Alexander. He was assassinated in the south of France, in Marseille, and he asked the priest to come and accompany him to this memorial service. But they were very reluctant to do so because the place where the king was assassinated was an intersection, a busy intersection of Marseille. So Vladika decided that he would do it alone. So he took his little suitcase, his eagle rug, put it on the asphalt, and proceeded to serve the memorial service. And the gendarmes, the policemen, stopped the traffic. They waited for Vladika to finish the service. Vladika finished, he packed up and left. So that was a wonderful story from his life. And then, of course, the last scene in the icon is the repose of St. John in 1966. So if people know the life of St. John, they can easily be reminded of the main scenes from his life here on this wonderful icon. And of course, the icon is set into a frame, and underneath the icon is a cassock which Vladika wore, and of course a relic that was given to us by the late Archbishop Anthony of San Francisco. He was the bishop who followed Vladika to San Francisco and became the ruling bishop there. And of course, next to you, right behind you, is the icon, the Kursk icon of the Mother of God, which is very fitting to be next to Vladika Jan, because Vladika, as I mentioned earlier, had a great veneration for it. And of course, the Kursk icon is important to all of us Russian emigres, because it is the icon which led the immigration out of Russia into the West. And we call her the Odigitria, or the indicator of the path. And since 2007, when the reunification of the Russian Church occurred, the icon has been going back, the original icon, the miraculous icon, has been going back to Russia every year to visit Kursk in September, and then one or two other dioceses of the Russian Church. But it resides, its home is in New York City, but it is rarely there because it's always traveling, either to Australia, South America, Europe, and we have the blessing from our Metropolitan Hilarion to have the icon Thanksgiving week every November. So the icon comes and stays here in Washington for a whole week. But this, of course, is a wonderful reproduction of the icon painted by one of our iconographers.
St. John have founded our parish, but how he participated in our parish life later?
Vladika John, after his successful trip to Washington, successful because he succeeded in his main mission, which was to help the Russian refugees, and number two, because he founded a community. He continued to correspond with Father Nicholas Pekatoros, who was my predecessor. He was an archimandrite. He was of Greek background. They corresponded. Vladika would visit the parish from time to time when he came for a meeting of the bishops. And so he continuously kept us in his prayers. And I believe sincerely that we are still in his prayers. And he's looking after us, and I think it's thanks to his prayers and his intercession that our parish is enjoying some success.
As I know, you have a very personal story related with St. John and with his help, how he has helped to you. Can you share this story?
Well, when I became a priest in 1974, I was assigned to a parish in Stratford, Connecticut, a small parish. I was there for 3 years. The parish was so small that they could barely pay me anything. They were able to give me a place to live with my family. And I had to work in New York City for 3 years. I traveled from Stratford to New York 1 hour and a half one way, 1 hour and a half the other way by train. And I dealt with Russian books and Russian emigres from the Soviet Union back then. And for 3 years I had this interesting work, which gave me a salary and which really helped me deepen my appreciation for my Russian roots. But like all good things, they end sooner or later, and I lost my job. And I couldn't imagine finding something that would sustain my family that had nothing to do with Russia, just some kind of secular job. And we were going through a difficult stage in our parish life. And Vladika John was not yet canonized. And we were sitting with my Matushka one evening after services, and she asked me if I ever regretted becoming a priest. And I was surprised by that question, and I explained to her that it's hard to express the joy that one receives from standing before the altar table and serving the Eucharist, the bloodless sacrifice, the body and blood of Christ. It's a joy that keeps you, sustains you, keeps you going. She was very satisfied with that answer. She understood me immediately. But as I said, we were going through a difficult time. My jobless benefits were ending. I had to find a job. And I was sending out my resumes to various American companies that were doing business with Russia. Maybe I thought I could get a job as a translator or something like that, consultant in one way or the other. And that night, when we went to bed, I had a dream, and St. John appeared in that dream, and he asked me a question: have you ever regretted that you became a priest? The exact same question that my Matushka asked me before. And I said, well, Dika, of course I don't regret becoming a priest. And then he said, this is all I remember. He said, well, I don't regret that you became a priest. And then he said something to the effect that I will soon receive a position of great responsibility. That's all I remember. And I woke up in the next morning. I told my Matushka nothing about that. But I felt refreshed. I felt so much confidence. I knew that things would work out. And suddenly the thought occurred to me to send a letter to the Voice of America radio station in Washington. And I wrote the letter, And I introduced myself. I'm a Russian Orthodox priest. I'm used to speaking in public. I can easily translate things, and I can learn to become a broadcaster. And I receive an answer from them that come to New York and take our exam. So I went to New York. I took the exam. I even took my portable typewriter with me. They said I could bring dictionaries. I passed the exam, and I was offered a position. I was offered a position as a news writer, not a religious broadcaster. So I was hired, and I kept going back to Stratford, Connecticut from Washington every weekend until we found a permanent priest for my parish in Stratford. And of course, the parish here was small. The priest, Father Nicholas, was very elderly, and he needed a second priest. He didn't speak English, so everything worked out perfectly. When I came to Washington, soon after that, we began rebuilding this church, and it's now a wonderful temple through the prayers of Saint John, through the prayers of all the founders of this parish. One thing I should add is when I was ordained a deacon, we lived in Nyack, New York, which was a wonderful parish where Father Serafim Slobodskoy was the parish priest. Father Serafim Slobodskoy was the author of a very famous book, Zakon Bozhy, The Law of God, which many generations grew up on here in the Russian emigration in the West, and then this book was republished in Russia. But so I was a deacon in Nyack for 3 years, and this is where I met the future Bishop Basil Radyanka. He was Father Vladimir then. He was still a married priest, and his mother lived in Nyack, New York. And the future Vladika Vasily would send cassettes of his BBC religious broadcast to Russia. And as a deacon, I would listen to them, and they were very inspiring. And I often thought to myself, it would be great to do the same thing Vladika Vasily is doing, broadcasting to Russia. And through the prayers of Vladika John, that's the work that I performed for close to 30 years. I'd like to show you another wonderful icon of St. John here in our church, if you don't mind.
Father Victor, what can you tell us about these murals?
Well, frankly, I think this is one of the best iconographic depictions of St. John that I've seen. This was painted by Father Theodore Kufos, who was studied under Archimandrit Kyprian Pyzhov. He was the founder of the Russian iconographic school of the Church Abroad in the West, in Jordanville. And Father Theodore, who painted all the middle section of our church, had great veneration for St. John. And this is one of the first paintings he did, murals he did in this church. And this was painted before the canonization of St. John, but in anticipation of the canonization. But this is one of my favorite icons of St. John, and it's just a wonderful, warm, spiritual depiction of the great saint.
Can you explain why it's your favorite?
It's because of the expression of his face, which I think captures the essence of his soul. Vladika John was someone who lived the liturgy, who lived the liturgy not only because he enjoyed it himself, he received joy out of serving it, but he hoped and prayed that it would give joy and comfort to everyone. And of course, he lived the liturgy beyond the doors of the church. I mean, he would carry the joy which he received in Holy Communion by taking it out of the church and expressing it among the people. And he would share the love of God everywhere. And I think this is captured in his expression that's depicted on this wonderful mural painted before the canonization of St. John. I hope other people will also notice that as they come upon this icon and pray before it.
How do you feel St. John's presence here in our parish, in our church, and in our life?
Well, of course, it's a spiritual presence. The saints, although they are members of the church in heaven, they are ever present here. And of course, when we're in church and we are participating liturgically in a service which binds heaven to earth, earth to heaven, and we're one church, one holy Catholic Apostolic Church, with the Church of the Saints, and they're all here. And when, during the liturgy, we sing that all the heavenly hosts are invisibly present, and we believe that, and we absolutely believe that St. John is present here with us, because this is one of the places he dedicated months of his life to, which he cared for. And if he cared for us during his earthly life, of course he cares for us and prays for us in his eternal life. So he's here.
Thank you very much.
Welcome.